Welcome, everyone, to Creating a Family. Talk about foster, adoptive, and kinship care. I'm Dawn Davenport. I am the host of this show, as well as the director of the nonprofit creatingafamily.org. We also have Tracy Whitney with us today because, as you probably have heard, I will be retiring. And as I shuffle off into the pasture, Tracy is going to be the one who takes my place. And you guys are going to be in such incredibly good hands because Tracy has been with us for 9 years. And in many ways, she is also, people think of me as the voice of Creating a Family. But the truth is, so is Tracy, because Tracy has done most of the writing of our articles, as well as the newsletter. And she also is the heart of our really large online support group, which you guys know about, facebook.com/groups/creating a family. And one other quick reminder is that we are now on YouTube. Actually, we've been on YouTube, but we've only been on the audio part of YouTube. We are now on video on YouTube. So if you're curious about the behind the scenes, or if you want to see our wonderful experts as they speak, or Tracy or I, you can pop over to Creating a Family on YouTube and actually see us. So there you go. All right, today we're going to be talking about a topic near and dear to both Tracy and my hearts, and that is how people of faith can support vulnerable children and families. We're going to have with us today to talk about that Jason Johnson. He is the National Director of the Pure Religion Project with the Christian Alliance for Orphans, and you may have heard him called CAFO, but in fact it is, what it stands for is the Christian Alliance for Orphans. He has 15 years of pastoral experience, and he is both a foster and an adoptive dad. He coaches churches and organizational teams on strategies and best practices related to caring for vulnerable children and families. We also have Rabbi Shmuly Yanklowitz. He is the founder and president of YATOM, the Jewish Foster and Adoption Network. Rabbi Yanklowitz has twice been named one of America's top rabbis by Newsweek and has been named by The Ford as one of the 50 most influential Jews and one of the most inspiring rabbis in America. Rabbi Yanklowitz is the author of 28 books on Jewish ethics, and his writings have appeared in outlets as diverse as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and the Atlantic. And yes, I'm going to say that is a very diverse group. He has served as a speaker at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and a Rothschilds Fellow in Cambridge, UK. He and his wife are also foster parents. Before we jump in, let me say that we talked about it ahead of time, and both Jason and Shmuly prefer that we use their first names, so that's what I'm going to do. So welcome, Jason and Shmuly, to Creating a Family. As I mentioned, this is a topic near and dear to our hearts. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Don and Tracy. Good to be here.
Wonderful to be with you all.
All right. Well, faith communities honestly are some of the best places to inspire people to step up to support families and kids who are struggling. And specifically, they can, and I would say should be, a good source for finding foster parents, just to cut through the chase and say that is another great place to find foster parents. But as we discuss, it doesn't stop there. There is so much more that faith communities can do, both to support families who are struggling and then to support families that are beyond the struggling stage and are needing intervention at that point. So let's start. I'm going to start by saying, I'm going to ask each of you how you see churches, synagogues, mosques, or other communities of faith stepping forward to help families. Shmuly, let me start with you. What do you see as far as what churches, in your case, synagogues, what other communities of faith are doing?
Well, I could speak about this for hours, but let me try to condense it briefly. Let me start by zooming out to say that we all know bad religion. Bad religion inspires hate and division, extremism and fundamentalism. There's tons of bad religion in the world. But I'm a big believer that good religion is the best pathway forward to addressing the loneliness epidemic, to addressing the breakdown of community in general, where people are having trouble dating and finding life partners. People are having trouble finding places for spirituality and for human connection. And most certainly on the pathway towards building families, whatever that family looks like, I think that houses of worship and religious communities at large are a crucial piece in the puzzle. And I think that's for a few reasons. One is that it really is a heroic pathway to care for vulnerable children who have experienced neglect or abuse or trauma. It requires abnormal levels of commitment to be a part of that journey. Secondly, we need communities to raise children. We can't raise them in isolation just as families. That will create narcissists. That will create people that think their life is about themselves if they're raised simply with that family unit is everything and not community. And thirdly, I really believe, whatever we want to call God, that the humility that emerges from understanding how small we are and yet how responsible we are is so crucial to taking responsibility for the millions of vulnerable children on the planet today. And so I can speak more specifically about the Jewish community, but let me pause there because that's kind of my first remarks about the power of good religion to play an important healing role here.
Thank you. Jason, how about you? What are you seeing as far as what churches are doing to be a force for good to help families, especially those that are struggling?
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the last particular decade, 15 years, is an increased awareness and focus on what's happening in our local communities. For several generations, for all of ages, the church has been actively engaged in caring for the vulnerable. And some of the primary application of that, we could argue, in the last 30, 40, 50 years, has been largely global in focus from a US-based perspective. And what we've seen is a growing awareness of what's happening locally, domestically, and then right in our own backyard. And an increased awareness of vulnerable families in our community, and an understanding that as the church in our city, what does it look like for us to be a presence and a force for good and for renewal in our city, and becoming aware of this dynamic of vulnerable families and the issue of foster care. Once you become aware of it, what we've seen churches realize is you can never not be aware of it anymore. Yeah. You can never unknow what you now know. And so we're seeing churches really begin to take strategic approaches towards what does that look like for us to care well for families on the continuum, from preventing families from finding themselves in the system to intervening when the system does get involved in traditional foster care spaces, to looking downstream at how do we serve and support youth who are, quote unquote, aging out of the system and being sent off into a world with relatively little infrastructure of support. And the common thread throughout all of that is really being driven by an understanding of what we fundamentally believe in the church is true, which is that God is a God who has moved towards us. And in response to that, we want to be the kind of people who collectively together, as Rabbi has said, not in isolation, but as a gathered community and capacity of the body, we have the unique opportunity as one of the most centrally unified, gathered community of people on the face of the planet to affect good together by moving towards some of the very places that God himself would move towards. And the application of that takes on various forms, from community to community and church to church. But it's just very beautiful to see a collective kind of movement as a whole from a macro level towards that, and communities all over the country through local churches.
I'm so glad you said that the part about it. That's what it seems to me, is that places of faith are places where people are coming together who have a like mind. And that's why they're such a powerful place to find support for vulnerable families. And as you both said, I'm so appreciative of the fact that we're looking at the whole continuum, because it doesn't begin once the family falls apart.
That's right.
It needs to begin not just with the members of that community, although the members of that community too. It's not that people of faith are immune from having family struggles. Right. So anyway, yes.
You mentioned that some of the practical implementation, Jason, of those, taking those beliefs and putting them into action, people moving towards other people in vulnerable situations. I'd love to hear from both of you how individual people within those communities are moving towards those vulnerable people in your observations.
Yeah, so ultimately, what we believe to be true that hovers over all of the faith community is that we're not all called to do the same thing, but everyone can do something. This is the unique diversity of the people of God coming together with their unique gifts. And even places in Scripture describe this in terms of a physical body. Some are ears, eyes, hands, feet, toes. If we were all right feet, we would run around in a circle all day long and look very busy, but ultimately be wildly ineffective, and we would exhaust ourselves. We would just be running in circles. So the beauty of the collection of the people of God is the diversity coming together in unity. And the application of that diversity is such that some necessarily need to open their home and bring children in. And frankly, some do not. I'm not adverse to saying to some, it'd probably be best if you didn't bring a child into your home, knowing you can barely feed yourself and tie your own shoes, but that doesn't mean you have a great place to serve. And so really opening people up to the creativity that God has given them, the unique experiences, the educations maybe that they have, the professions, the passions. For example, I tell a story of a barbecue restaurant owner that I met in Kansas City several years ago. And this is a guy who was very clear about what he was not called to do, which was to open his home to children. But he was very confident in what he was capable of doing, which was delivering the best barbecue in Kansas City to families who were welcoming children into their homes, or catering events that were serving these families for free. And so this is a guy who said, I know what I can't do, but I know what I can do. I can leverage my business and my passion for doing this for the good of this community. And it's more than just bringing a meal, although that's incredibly important. In that bringing of a meal, it's communicating to these families, you're seen, you're loved, you're cared for, and we're here for you. And so that's just one example of the creativity and the diversity that we're seeing happen all over the place.
Yeah, I love that. So in our YATOM family fellowship, what we're trying to address is a lack of foster families. There's a need for more. And we try to incentivize families to participate by giving them community to process with, holding their hand through getting licensed and educating them in the process, and potentially giving them a stipend if they need the support as well. But we're very clear also, as the pastor said, that we're not looking to convince people, yes, incentivize, but there are plenty of people, as was said, who are not right for this. And so we're not looking to persuade as much as inspire the right people and the right families to participate. And it's not only if they have the financial means to do this, many people don't have the character traits to do this, to be really patient and understanding. Someone might be better equipped to offer something else. But I just find that once you create spaces for participation, and with the diversity of types of participation, angels appear from all over the place. And I'll share one with you. We had these two foster brothers living in our house. And we hired a babysitter who we had never had before. We got her from an app. And she came. And within like 2 minutes, these boys were on her back, riding her like a horse around the house. And I said, oh my gosh, where do we find this woman? Like these boys were so difficult. And within minutes, she had, and I pulled her aside. I said, look, this looks amazing, but I have to tell you, this is going to be a hard day. These boys have a lot of trauma and behavioral issues, and it'd be really hard. And she whispered back to me, she said, I was once a foster kid too. And I'm ready for this. And there's people with stories all around us who can really tap into their own journey to pay it forward.
That's beautiful. And if I could just echo that, one thing that I have found to be true, and we often say is, in large part, I'm convinced people want their life to count for something. They want to be spending their lives in meaningful, impactful ways. And the issue for them is not so much that I don't care. It's more often, I do care, I just don't know how. And to Rabbi's point, when we begin to lay out the diversity and the creativity of opportunities to wrap around and support families and children, to open your home or to wrap around and support those who are, it is so often the case that it is not a matter of convincing. It's simply a matter of providing the clarity people need to act on what's already in their heart.
Love that.
I think you raised such a good point that in addition, I think people think they want to help, but they're afraid of getting in over their head.
Mhm.
So being able to give, as you have both just said, the diversity of things that could be helpful, coming in and doing running a load of wash and putting up clothes, more importantly, or that somebody could say, well, I could do that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Shmuly, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, that's wonderful, and I very much agree with that point. And if you think back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yes, we do have some basic needs to care for ourselves, but there are these higher needs that all humans share to find purpose and meaning and connection. And I really think that faith communities can be the best of providing those pathways. We've heard it before, but just to remind us, when a baby is born, their fists are clenched, and if you see somebody die, they die with their hands wide open, as if to say, when a baby comes in the world, they don't know yet that they need people. But everyone who dies has their hands reached out, almost like reaching out for people, knowing how dependent we are on others. And we can only live for so long in isolation. Our deepest meaning is in connection. And I think the more that we can help people find their passion and purpose in service, the better.
And it strikes me that all of this must come from the outflow of a really connected community at the ground level. So if you're in a faith community and you don't connect with, on just a regular person-to-person level, with the person sitting next to you on Sundays or Saturdays, then you don't have the opportunity to listen to what they may have to offer and tell them of needs that you know about, and vice versa. And so if you don't have that community for yourself, it's really hard to help them and help yourself see the value of providing community for those who are vulnerable.
That's right. It's incredibly difficult to know that you are an ear if you're disconnected from the rest of the body, or even if you do know that you are an arm, it's hard to be an arm disconnected from the body. And so there's a lot of freedom in, like Rabbi has said, in recognizing our limitations. And actually there's empowerment in that. I know what I am not. And that helps me know with confidence what I am and what I am capable of doing. And oftentimes what we see in people is they hear a kind of crisis level language around the child welfare and family welfare space, of course, which there is a crisis. And when the crisis language is paired with their sense of, I don't feel like I have what it takes to make a meaningful difference, or who am I to really make a dent in this overwhelming problem, then if I don't know where to start or if I can make a difference, I'm not going to start, and I'm not going to attempt to. And so I think what we have the opportunity to do, and what a lot of people are being really motivated by and are coming to really understand and be inspired by, is every act of engagement, every act of service is meaningful and significant. Even what we might deem the most simple things carry loads of significance when connected with all the other moving parts. So one might say, really, catering barbecue to families? I mean, is that really solving the crisis? No, it's not solving the crisis, but it is making a meaningful impact in connection with all the other people that are doing the other things that collectively are making a significant difference. And there's a lot of freedom in understanding my limitations, but then the empowerment that comes in doing the thing that I'm uniquely designed to do.
Love that. Religious communities in many ways are struggling, like our society is struggling. There is political polarization, which is really difficult to manage. There's economic instability and concern. There's technologies and new forms of entertainment that religious communities can't compete with, and short attention spans. There's a growing scarcity mentality that, there's not enough for me and I'm missing out. And given all that, I think this can't be framed simply as charity, just being altruistic, but rather as a pathway to our flourishing, that our thriving and flourishing as people is a part of feeling a society that we're connected to and a part of. And I think, as Pastor said so well, like, this is not all on the systemic level. There are people who will work on the systemic level to try to solve problems at the root causes. But most of us cannot and should not work on systemic levels. We should work on direct service levels and just inspire more love and compassion into the spaces where we exist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that segues beautifully into my next question about leaders. So when we're moving out of that systemic and taking it on as the personal, and here's what we can do, here's what I should do, how do you motivate those people in your circles, fellow rabbis, fellow pastors, fellow leaders in other faith communities? How are you getting them engaged, and how do you see them responding to that?
It's a great question. At a micro level, for the individual church, the individual pastor in a local community, they're juggling a lot. There's 20, 25 things on their plate any given day, and then the unexpected. I woke up on Monday not expecting to get the notice that I'm now doing a funeral on Thursday. Those kinds of things. So there's a lot on their plate, and by and large, we live in a pandemic of busyness for the average person and family, and our faith communities and our churches are not immune to that. And so often the case with an individual church, the response that organizations who are advocating for this might get from church leaders might be, we love what you're doing and we're fully on board. We just can't imagine adding more to our plates. We're already so busy and spread thin.
That is exactly what we hear.
And so how do we help solve for that? Part of how we help solve for that is not by doubling down on, but don't you understand how urgent the need is? And all the Bible verses that talk about how God cares about this. Mm-hmm. I think the average leader says, no, I get that. I totally get that. I just am unclear on how we could actually do this well in a sustainable way, given the current demands that we have. And so part of, even going back to what we've previously talked about, recognizing none of this is done well in isolation. It happens best in the context of community. And so what we're seeing at CAFO, and a lot of the work that we're doing in local communities around the country, is helping to really catalyze and convene local collaborative networks. Churches and faith communities and organizations and community partners working together, and sharing the burden, in a sense, for churches and each individual partner recognizing, okay, the problem is not all on me to solve, but if our church can find our best and highest use, and then work in collaboration and integration with other churches and organizations in our local community who are also finding their best and highest use, then perhaps together we can make a more meaningful difference. And so the invitation to an individual church at a micro level is not to do everything and be overwhelmed by it. The invitation is find the thing that you might be best at. And it might already, frankly, be something that your church is already doing or a part of. It might require starting nothing new and adding nothing new to your plate, but do it in the context of collaboration. And there's a multiplicative effect to the work that you're doing when we're doing it together. And we often see that solves for, it's not that we don't care, it's just we don't know how. And now we're providing clarity. Okay, now we understand where we can go and what we can do. And it's taking a step back from we can't imagine adding more to our plate. And instead, it actually feels like, we feel like we can actually start to make a meaningful difference. And it doesn't feel burdensome. It actually feels lighter because we're doing it together.
Many hands make light work.
Yeah, exactly. Jason, can you give us an example of what you meant by a church is already doing something that can be applied to this different ministry?
Yeah. So I'll very, very briefly, kind of crude illustration might be the river analogy of there's children and families flowing down the river, and there's this midstream point of engagement where we might call it something has happened and it necessitates intervention. There's the downstream, the further downstream children and families make it, we recognize some of the social issues that result there. But then there's the upstream issues of how are these families getting in the stream in the first place and what can we do to prevent? And so there's multiple points of engagement on this continuum. And by and large, faith communities historically have been involved at different points of this continuum doing good work, perhaps serving the homeless in their community, perhaps serving in crisis pregnancy situations, perhaps mentoring in their local communities. They're doing a lot of these things already, just in isolation and not understanding the interconnectedness of all of these different things. And so in many ways, it's less about telling the church you're not doing enough, you need to do more. And it's more about helping the church discovering the good things they're already doing and the values and the vision that already exist in their church, and how to actually build capacity in those things that they're already doing.
Let me take a short break to remind you that we need your questions to be submitted to us so that we could answer them on the, I was going to say new, it's not new, the Weekend Wisdom Podcast. It's a couple of years old now, but the Weekend Wisdom Podcast. That is where we take one of your questions and we answer it. So please send us your questions. You can send them to info@creatingafamily.org. You don't have to put Weekend Wisdom in it. We'll know if you send a question in that that's what it's for. So now back to the show.
Shmuly, how are you engaging with other leaders in your faith community, but also other faith communities around you?
Yeah, I would say I'm largely failing in that. It has been very difficult to get this bumped up on the communal discourse priority list. The Jewish community is flooded with institutional concerns and rising anti-Semitism and security needs and other causes that have been at the forefront. And this is increasingly challenging. What's also increasingly challenging is that I think there's two identities that are dominating today. The first identity is the political identity in a hyper-politicized era. And the second is the consumer identity, that people love to buy stuff all the time. There's like an Amazon package showing up at the door, and there's an Instacart showing up. You know, somebody's walking down the road with a bag of something. Everywhere we go, political and consumption. And I think the third identity that's missing out is the member of society, the member of a broader community, the arts, the culture, the world of service and of faith. And I think where child welfare has a unique angle is almost everything has been politicized today. And I think child welfare has been politicized less than many other causes, in a way that people really can feel like it's an escape from some of that polarization that our society is plagued with. And so I try to inspire our faith communities to show how central this has been to modern and ancient Jewish consciousness. I talk about modern stories like Julius Rosenwald, who built 5,000 schools for Black children in the Deep South over 100 years ago when there weren't schools. I talk about Janis Korsak, who in the Holocaust was leading an orphanage and was a pediatrician, and he had the chance to escape, but he went with his 192 orphans all the way down to the Treblinka gas chambers and was killed. I talk about how our greatest prophet, Moshe, was himself a foster child or adopted, into the Egyptian empire. And how one of our greatest women heroes and prophets, Esther, herself was fostered or adopted by Mordecai, her uncle. And the stories that are built into this history that can inspire people to participate. When you look at around 700,000 kids in America who pass through the foster care system every year, over 4,000 at any given moment. And you look at, especially the older ones who age out of the system and the pipeline, where about 2/3 end up going towards prison, homelessness, or human trafficking. You see something that is not only about charity towards the individual, but about a healing of a society. When we leave the most vulnerable behind, it hurts us all. After the Holocaust, the Jewish community was very involved, given how many Jewish orphans there were. And now it's a different reality where we're asking our families not to bring in Jewish kids. They're non-Jewish kids almost always. And there's a growing interest, but I admit that I am failing to capture the minds and hearts to really advance this to the next level. And to all the listeners out there, I'm open to your ideas.
Shmuly, one thing that I'm not saying that I have been any more successful than you, but one thing that I'm very aware of and that I have found church leaders, and I would assume synagogue leaders the same, is that it's good for the institution. It is good for the church. It is good for the community to have a shared mission. It brings people together. It brings people closer to the church. And just from a very simplistic, if you are in service with somebody, I go back to my example of washing clothes. So if two people go over and pick up the clothes and are washing them and go back together, they get to know each other. So when they see each other on their day of worship, they have something to talk about.
Yes.
And it just seems to me from a very practical level. I mean, and I grant you that there are so many programs and so many ministries that are competing. So I definitely get that. And that's more what I have seen is, but just that it's so important. Yeah.
There's one quick thing on that, which is that one of the things they say in clergy school is your job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. But one of the challenges, many people who come to places of prayer are coming because of their own woundedness. And many of the people who feel life is great, and are really thriving might not show up as much. And those are sometimes the people that need to be leaned on more. Now, it's not a total binary. Oh, there's the wounded, and then there's those who are thriving. Of course, we all have our shadow and our light, and we all have our own woundedness. But I think that exactly like you said, if people showed up with a sense that this is a place where I'm coming to serve, a place of shared mission, that would be very powerful to transform our institutions as such, as opposed to just a place of healing for those who are wounded and don't have any more space in their life to serve. I'm curious if Pastor experiences that as well.
Yeah, Don, you bring up a great point, and so much of the advocacy and the language for a long time, and understandably so, has been highlighting the delta between the growing need and the lack of involvement. And there's not enough foster parents, there's not enough wraparound support, not enough services, and the delta is getting bigger and bigger. And that's been the primary leading language to try to motivate people. And actually, I actually find that to be quite counterintuitive and counterproductive, because just the psychology of people says, tell me what the majority of people are doing, and I'm going to go with that. And what we've been saying for a long time is the majority of people are not getting involved. And I think the average consumer, to Rabbi's point, in our faith communities says, well, there must be a reason why the majority aren't, and I'm going to go with the majority. And so I wonder if, and a lot of the work that we do with organizations who are working with churches and faith communities is helping them to think through what type of language and advocacy might be more inspirational and impactful to their audiences. And perhaps rather than highlighting how much is not happening, what if we spent more time celebrating what is happening? And we started to invite people and cut into this kind of aspirational end state. This is what we're aiming towards. And here's a story of a family. Here's a story of a faith community. I was just with a large organization in Florida the last couple of days, and we had a pastor that's connected to this organization share a little bit about their experience. And I asked him to do it. I asked him to share nothing about the impact that their involvement has had on children and families. We all know that the beneficiaries of the work that we are doing ultimately trickles down to children and families and communities. That's who we serve. But I think there's also a parallel beneficiary that's equally important to highlight. And it's not just those that we are serving, it's also those who are doing the serving, to your point, Don.
Yeah.
So the question that will never be asked by a faith leader, because it sounds so pretentious and self-centered to ask, but it's an important one that we answer, is how does our involvement in this not just benefit the children and families we're serving, but how does it benefit us as a church?
Yeah.
And so I asked this pastor to share how their involvement as a church has doubled back on their church in terms of discipleship and formation and growth and connection and that shared mission. And he just beautifully told stories of how, going back to what we previously talked about, how they have seen just people rise up out of the woodworks who have said, now that there's clear paths for me to engage, I'm going to step into this. And he said, they've just seen people engage in a shared mission that had they not brought this mission into their church, their church would have completely missed out on this good gift that they've seen, and how it's doubled back on them in terms of formation and growth and connection and supporting one another in ways that they otherwise would have missed out on. So I think it's important that we are obviously always communicating how opening our homes to become foster parents, wrapping around and supporting those who are doing that, engaging at different points of the continuum, are serving children and families as the direct beneficiaries. It is equally important, I think, that we are communicating how those who are doing the serving are impacted as well.
Yeah. And the church or the synagogue or the mosque who is doing the serving or who is setting up the program is benefited as well.
Absolutely. And I would say, just on a personal level, and I'm sure Rabbi can attest to this too, our family, through our foster care journey and adoption journey, we've experienced some very difficult things that, frankly, the world would say, no, the goal of your life is to purposely avoid those kinds of things. Why would you intentionally move towards those things, right? But it is through some of the beautiful things and some of the very broken things that our family has received good gifts that we otherwise would have completely missed out on. And so,
Amen.
Of course, our family has benefited from this. That's not why we do it. But it's important that, for example, for us communicating with families that are considering perhaps opening their home, I want them to hear, yeah, it can be very difficult and it's very disruptive and it's an odd space. But let me tell you how unbelievably enriching it's been for our family and our kids to grow up in this odd space.
We just did a podcast not long ago with the boy. It was the youngest person we've ever had, and his mother was on as well. Otherwise, we would not have. We don't generally have anybody below the age of 18, but he was 15. But he was the foster brother, and they have written a book. And he was talking about how he and his siblings, the siblings already in the family, have benefited, and how hard it was. You know, that there were hard things, and that there were good things about his experience of being a foster brother. Something that I have seen work successfully is asking the church or the synagogue or any place of faith if they would host a training session for foster parents, and stress that one of the options is to be a respite provider, to not be a foster parent, but to come and be able to support. And it seems to be an easy way where the synagogue might just be offering their space. Therefore, that's an easy ask. And if they would help publicize it amongst their community, then that seems to be, and especially the part about stressing that we're just seeking respite providers, which there's a huge need for. So anyway, have you had success with that, or have you seen others, Shmuly, have success with that?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I love that. And what we ask our family fellows to do, so our fellows are those who are just starting their journey. They don't know if they want to adopt or foster or if they want to do anything, but they want to explore it for 9 months. And we educate them and give them community. And what we ask of them is not just that they get licensed, because that might work for some, it might not for others, but they become ambassadors in their community. And so they're the people that then approach their local community around the country and hold those types of info sessions. So we train them to be able to facilitate those conversations. So yes, the model you're talking about is very important to us.
Jason, how about your experience with that as a way to dip, having a community of faith dip their toe into the water of supporting foster care?
Yeah. You know, with respite, you know, and it might vary a bit from state to state, but it's relatively more longer term, extended babysitting, and it's more than babysitting. But for families that are fostering, it's oftentimes more than 72 hours, maybe a few days, where they're needing someone to watch the kids. It requires a respite provider. And in many cases, and it varies quite a little bit from state to state, that still requires a pretty extensive amount of training, almost to the point where, you know, you're almost just 1 or 2 steps removed from being a full-on licensed foster parent. But that's a necessary space. And it's a space in which families or individuals can become respite providers and, again, provide a practical support. We can watch your children for an extended period of time to give you a break. But again, it communicates more than that. It's yes, we will watch your children, but the bigger picture is you're loved and you're seen and we're here for you and you're not doing this alone. But I would also say that one thing that we work with churches and communities on quite often is really establishing the tiered on-ramping model, where if a tier one might be lowest hanging fruits. We often say tier one could be simple but significant, obviously, but almost harder to not do it kind of stuff, right? Like it'd be easier for you to not tell me all the reasons you can't do it, because in that amount of time you could have just gotten it done, like praying or for families or bringing meals for families. And then tier two being maybe higher levels of commitment and time and closer proximity to families and relationships. And then tier three for me would be anything that requires kind of higher level, extensive amounts of training, obviously becoming a certified foster parent, or in many cases, a respite provider. It's a pretty extensive process, or CASA, or a number of things. And for communities to have on-ramping opportunities that meet people where they are and help them take their best next steps, I think is incredibly important.
Giving them a tiered approach, or giving them steps that that feel, I like how you said that. Rather than argue with me, it's easier to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like if you have children,
I was going to say it doesn't work with my children. I'm just going to say I've used that.
They argue with you for 15 minutes about unloading the dishwasher. And
right.
You say, what? In the 15 minutes you spent, you could have had it done in the first 5 and been hanging out doing whatever you want the last 10. It would have just been easier for you to do it. And the tiered on-ramp is really a reflection of, if everyone can do something and we all have unique parts to play, we want to have models that reinforce that and next steps to reinforce that. But it's not a ranking system. It's not tier 3 is varsity and tier 1 is, freshman B team. And maybe one day you'll be good enough. Not at all. For some people, tier 1 is their best and highest use. And, but what it does do is it meets people where they are and it helps them take their next steps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me take a break for just a moment to ask a favor of you. We need your ratings. We need your reviews. Please give us a star rating on whatever app you are looking for. You can also write a review. We would really love that as well. And I'm going to take a moment to actually tell you on the 3 top apps that people are using exactly how to do that. On Apple, to leave either a rating or a review, you go to the Creating a Family page, which is the page where all the episodes are listed. And at the bottom, you can give a star review. And then right below that, you can click Write a Review, and you can do it that way. On Spotify, to leave a rating, a star rating, again, you go to the page, the actual podcast page, Creating a Family, and you leave, and at the bottom there is a star rating there. To leave a review, to write a review, you actually have to go to the page for this episode, and then at the bottom of the show notes there will be a place to write a review. And on YouTube, you just leave a comment. We will read all the reviews, we will look at all the star ratings, and we would really appreciate your help. So thank you so much in advance. And now back to talking about faith communities and what they can do to help with foster care and other ways they can help families that are vulnerable.
So for those of us that are sitting every Sunday or Saturday and trying to figure out, are we an ear? Are we a leg? Trying to figure out what is our best or what is the most practical thing that we can do. Shmuly, can you start with just a couple very practical examples of things that people can start doing right now that would maybe put them on that on-ramp?
Okay, so I'll leave the practical to Pastor. I tend to like the world of theory more than practical. So the first thing I would invite people to think about are the questions: what is my passion and what's my purpose?
Yeah.
If I'm not aligned with my passion, then I will burn out from some path that's not authentic to that, from where I'm best aligned. And I think Pastor articulated that really well earlier. So what is my unique passion that if I'm really tired, I'll still want to do it?
Yes.
Secondly, where's my power? Where am I uniquely aligned to serve where someone else is not aligned? So that's the first framework I would put out. People to ask, where is my passion and purpose, and where's my power? The second I would ask is, what's what we call in Hebrew, your avoda? What's your spiritual work? And where do you need to go in the world to do your spiritual work right now, to grow in your character and the dozens of character traits? Because being involved in fostering will expose those vices and those virtues, and it opens this whole world of potentially thriving on the next level. So one question is about outward looking, passion, purpose, power, and one question is about inward and inner life and what one wants to achieve. But here's the last thing I'll say, and again, I'm saying nothing to your question about practical.
Those are Jason, pretty practical.
Yeah, we're going to tee you up, Jason.
It's just very relative for me. But the next, I think, is that it is not hard to live without making choices. The world will make choices for us if we don't make choices. The world will tell us what to buy and what job to do and how to spend our time. So I want to share this short story. There's a man who died. When he realized he had died, he saw God coming closer with a suitcase in hand. Here's the dialogue between God and dead man. Man, God, all right, son, it's time to go. Man, so soon? I got a lot of plans still. God, I'm sorry, but it's time to go. Man, so what do you have in the suitcase? God, your belongings. Man, my belongings? You mean my things, my clothes, my money? God, those things were never yours. They belong to the earth. Man, is it my memories? God, no, they belong to time. Man, is it my talent? God, no, they belong to divine providence. Man, is it my friends, my family? God, no, son, they belong to the path you traveled. Man, is it my wife, my children? God, no, they belong to your heart. Man, then it must be my body. God, no, it belongs to dust. Man, then surely it's my soul. God, you are sadly mistaken, son, your soul belongs to me. Man, so I never owned anything? God, that's right, you never owned anything. Man with tears in his eyes and full of fear took the suitcase from God's hands and asks God, then what was mine? God, your choices. Every choice you made was yours. And I think about that all the time in a world where we don't often proactively make choices. How can we reclaim that power to say, today when I wake up, it's a vote of confidence that I'm supposed to be here in the world, and I'm supposed to be here to fulfill my mission, and I need to make choices as to how I'm going to do that. And if we can all find that spaciousness in our lives, I think it's going to lead to powerful things, and that will lead to the practical avenues of where one is uniquely placed.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better, and I love the idea of helping people think creatively about their passions. And as Rabbi said, what's the thing that even when I'm tired, I'll still do it because I can't not do it. And the idea of even how we budget, it's very commonplace and very well understood that it's important to have a financial budget. And a budget is essentially we are making decisions now about how we are going to make decisions in the moment. And so in the moment, we don't have to figure it out in the moment. We have already made those decisions. And I love what Rabbi is saying is, how can we orient our lives and make decisions about how we are going to make decisions that are in alignment with our passions and the unique giftings that we've been given. And it's not about, just live the same life as everybody else in the world and then add some spiritual things on top. Add some God things on top. The expected response and the common response from that is, I just feel like I'm too busy. Well, of course you're too busy. If the goal is live the same life that everyone else in the world is living, and then try to add some God things on top of that. So it's not a matter of add more on top. It's a matter of let's make decisions about how we are going to make decisions in terms of the infrastructure of how we do this whole thing, how we orient our lives and align our lives with the unique passions and giftings that we've been given. And then really demystifying a lot of it. I mean, simplifying it for people who for a long time have been told this is a really big deal, and it is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it's major crisis level, and it is major crisis level. But implicit in that is, so your response needs to be a really big deal. and monumental. And the average person says, I don't even know where to start with that. And does my menial bringing of a meal mean anything to the big macro? And what we need to help people understand is absolutely, because it's a Trojan horse of sorts. So there's bringing of the meals, there's providing tangible goods, diapers or beds for grandmas who are bringing in grandkids, kinship placements, or providing practical, tangible things for families. There's a babysitting or respite, as we've talked about. There's utilizing my business to be a foster-friendly business. If you're a foster family in the community, then there's unique incentives for you and benefits for you in our business. And it's thinking creatively about what God has put in your hands, the unique gifts and passions, the experiences you have had, as the Rabbi shared in his story with the babysitter who came over. Hey, are you sure you're prepared for this? Oh, I am more prepared for this than you could possibly imagine, because I am that. I was that. That is my story.
Right.
And those stories are all over the place.
Yeah.
If we're willing to open up the space to say, let's think creatively about your story.
Yeah.
And I think what we find is people come out of the woodworks, as we've said, and they go, yes, finally, somebody's creating space for me to think creatively about what's possible for me. And I think what we find at the end of the day is people care a lot more. They just don't know how to care.
I love that. I want to add just one brief thing to that amazing list, which is the power of words. That when we talk to someone who's in the trenches, so to speak, rather than just pound them with questions, oh, what's the kid situation and where are they from and what's the bio mother's situation, offering words of support and words of comfort and words of strengthening, having people who are immersed in this feel really good about what they're doing, rather than just feel like they're interrogated wherever they go. I feel like that's level one, is using the power of words.
It's good. Or like they're the weird oddballs, you're amazing. I can never do what you do. And there's already the, inevitably people who are engaged in this are going to feel different. They're going to feel like, I don't know where I fit in anymore because our life is so different. And helping to train other people on how to speak words of encouragement into them is really important. And I mentioned the Trojan horse earlier. I think helping people see that in every act of service that they're doing, from the bringing of a meal to opening of your home to children, that is meeting a real tangible need. And we don't want to dismiss that. But it is also part of a much bigger thing. And it acts as a Trojan horse to something bigger. And so the bringing of a meal meets a real tangible need, but it's also a Trojan horse into relationship. And opening our homes to children meets a real tangible need, but it's also a Trojan horse into the macro kind of breaking of generational cycles that we're participating in. And I think what's really important is celebrating the thing that people are doing right in front of them, but then also reminding them to lift their heads up regularly from the thing that's right in front of them and look around at the big thing that they're participating in. And we often say we're working hard to eliminate the language of just and only in this space. I'm just bringing a meal. It's no big deal. No. You're not just bringing a meal. You're meeting a real need for that family. But more than that, you are communicating something unbelievably profound to that family. There's no just in that. Well, we've only fostered one. No, you have not only fostered one. You have eternally and generationally impacted the life of a child and family in ways that you can't measure. There's no only in that, right? So constantly reminding people of the big thing that the thing right in front of them is connected to, I think is important.
Let me interrupt just one more time to both thank the Jockey Bean Family Foundation for their support of Creating a Family as an organization and this podcast specifically. Also, to remind you that it is through their support that we can offer you free courses. We have 15 courses on our free course page. You could find them on our website by creatingafamily.org. And then under trainings, you hover over that and you scroll and the pop-down menu comes up in free courses. Click on that. They are courses that are really intended for those who are actively parenting and you can use them for CE if you so need them for CE, because we do have a certificate of completion. But if you don't need them for CE, they're still terrific courses. So thank you, Jockey Being family, for your support. And now, back to the show. Before we close, I do want to, I've thought of something that we at Creating a Family do a lot of work in, and that is the area of what we in the biz call the kinship space, or relative caregivers. And let's be honest, it's often grandparents who are stepping up to care for their grandkids. Every synagogue, every church, every mosque, every community of any sort, but certainly faith communities, have somebody who is some grandparent or an aunt or an uncle who has stepped forward. And that could be an easy entry ramp just to make the leaders, the rabbis, the pastors, have them recognize that these families have needs, even if they're not reaching out, because oftentimes there's shame and embarrassment or frustration or anger or just a host of emotions that come along when you have to step forward to raise your child's child, that they have needs. And maybe it's just to have somebody take the kids for the weekend, or take them out on a Saturday, or
mow their lawn,
fix a meal, take them to soccer practice, or tutor them in geometry. And those are people who are already within your community. So that's another entry ramp or Trojan horse that should be, and I suspect it would be, near and dear to the hearts of the leaders.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear Rabbi's perspective on this. A couple of things. Kinship is a rapidly growing space, even at a policy level, from state to state. And so it's something that cannot be ignored, but it's also it's been existing all the time, under the radar, unofficial, off the books. But another thing is we found to be helpful for some church leaders in terms of the language they use, and how do we find who the families are? How do we know who these families are in our church? Well, if we were to say, hey, if you're a foster adoptive family in our church, we would love to know who you are. That's going to, obviously, a very small cross section of people might identify with that. But we have found the language of, hey, if you are currently caring for a child in your home that is not biologically yours, perhaps through foster care, adoption, or maybe it's a relative. You're caring for a relative's kids or close family friends. We want to know who you are. And we've heard from church leaders that when they use broadening language like that, suddenly it pulls people out of the woodwork. And then they're able to really know who they are and find ways to come alongside them.
And because kin do not, or at least most grandparents do not identify, even if they're licensed foster parents.
That's right.
They don't identify as that at all. They're a grandparent.
Right. We're just grandparents, or we're aunt and uncle. That's right.
Yeah. Shmuly, we're going to give you the last word. Anything on kinship or grandparent care?
I agree with what Pastor said about the importance of this rising phenomenon. And I think that there's a humility in not knowing what direction our life will take, and finding ourselves in situations we didn't always imagine ourselves being in. And I think that that's also part of an important part of spiritual or religious consciousness, of letting go of control. We're not in total control of our lives, and we don't know what the next day will bring us, and being ready just to be a servant and be responsive to the new reality. And I think that kinship it continues to be reinforced, the value of remaining with family. And the more we can promote that, I think the more powerful for all of us.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Shmuly Yanklowitz with YATOM, the Jewish Foster and Adoption Network, and Pastor Jason Johnson with the Christian Alliance for Orphans. Thank you so much for being here today. This is such an important topic, and we really appreciate your input and your expertise.